The wind howled down Queen Street like an uninvited guest, sharp enough to cut through bone. Snowflakes spun violently under the flickering street lamps, dusting the sidewalks with a white sheen that glowed faintly against the dark. Amelia Watson pulled her threadbare coat tighter around her body, but the fabric was too thin to offer real protection. Her shoes were soaked from the slush, her fingers raw from hours of scrubbing dishes in hot water at the diner. It had been her second double shift this week at Benny's Diner, a greasy little place near downtown Toronto that stayed open long past midnight to serve cab drivers, late-night students, and construction workers pulling overnight jobs. The smell of frying oil clung to Amelia's hair, mixed with the faint sweetness of syrup spilled during the breakfast rush. She was exhausted, body aching from the grind, but there was no time to think about fatigue. Rent was overdue, bills stacked up like bricks, and the landlord had banged on her door just last week, demanding money she didn't have, clutching the meager tip money in her pocket. Amelia trudged down a narrow alley off Queen Street to cut across toward her tiny basement apartment. She had walked this path hundreds of times. Usually, the worst she encountered was the reek of stale beer or a raccoon rummaging through the dumpsters. But tonight felt different. The silence pressed against her like a heavy weight. No footsteps, no chatter from nearby bars, just the sound of her own breathing and the crunch of her boots on icy ground. Then she nearly tripped Dot at first glance. The dark bundle beside the brick wall looked like discarded clothes or maybe a trash bag. She swore under her breath and bent down to push it aside, until she noticed the shine of polished leather shoes sticking out from beneath the folds of a coat. Her heart skipped. Shoes like that didn't belong in this part of the city. She crouched lower and froze. It wasn't a bundle of clothes. It was a boy. He couldn't have been more than 14. Maybe 15. His skin was ghostly pale, his breath shallow. Beneath a cashmere coat, he wore a crisp uniform private school, judging by the crest embroidered on the blazer. Amelia's eyes widened. Kids like this lived in Rosedale or Forest Hill, not the back alleys near downtown. Hey, can you hear me? She whispered, shaking his shoulder gently. No response. His skin was clammy, his forehead damp with cold sweat. Amelia's training from nursing school half finished, because she couldn't yet afford to continue, kicked in automatically. Weak pulse, cold extremities, shallow breathing, her stomach clenched, hypoglycemia, a severe drop in blood sugar. She rummaged through his coat pocket, desperate for a wallet, medication, anything. Instead, her fingers brushed against something sleek and expensive. A smartphone, far newer than anything she could ever dream of owning. The lock screen glowed to life. Only one emergency contact. Just one word. Dad. Amelia hesitated. Whoever his father was, he was wealthy, obscenely so. Wealthy men didn't live in her world. In her world, people ignored kids who collapsed on the sidewalk, figuring someone else would call 911. But something inside her pushed past the hesitation. Her thumb pressed the screen. The call connected instantly. Nicolas? The voice was deep, accented, carrying a weight that was both commanding and dangerous. Amelia swallowed hard. This isn't Nicolas. My name is Amelia Watson. I found a boy your son, I think, collapsed near Queen and Jarvis. He's breathing, but he's unconscious. I think it's hypoglycemia. The silence that followed made her blood run cold. She thought the line had dropped until she heard faint breathing on the other end. Controlled, sharp, like a predator calculating his next move. Is he breathing? The man asked finally. The calmness in his tone was gone, replaced by steel. Yes, pulse is weak but steady. I'm a nursing student. He needs glucose fast. Do not move him. Do not call anyone else. The words were not a suggestion, but an order. I am 8 minutes away. Keep him warm. The line went dead. Amelia's heart pounded. What had she just stepped into? Every instinct screamed at her to call an ambulance, but something in that man's voice. It wasn't a request. It was a command. She pulled her scarf off and draped it around the boy's neck, cradling his head against her lap as snow drifted down around them. Exactly 8 minutes later, the distant growl of an engine broke the silence. A black SUV slid to a stop at the mouth of the alley, windows tinted dark. 3 men emerged in perfect synchronization. their presence filling the space like shadows given form. Two stood guard, scanning the street. The third strode forward with deliberate precision. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a tailored overcoat that didn't quite conceal the bulge at his side. Amelia recognized the shape of a shoulder holster. His features were sharp, aristocratic, his dark eyes sweeping the alley before pinning her with an intensity that made her throat dry. He knelt beside the boy without a word. "You said hypoglycemia?" His voice was clipped, as if testing her knowledge. Amelia nodded quickly. "He needs glucose." Before she could finish, the man retrieved his small kit from his coat pocket, hands moving with practiced efficiency. He injected the boy with calm precision, not a tremor in his grip. Within seconds, color returned to the boy's cheeks, and his eyelids fluttered open. "Dad," the boy murmured weakly. Amelia felt her breath catch. The resemblance was undeniable, the same sharp eyes, the same angular features softened only by youth. The man's expression eased, though only slightly. "You forgot your emergency kit again," he said, voice low but edged with relief. The boy, Nicolas, nodded weakly. "I left it at school. After basketball practice." The man's jaw tightened. "We will discuss that later." Only then did he turn his gaze fully to Amelia. His eyes traveled from her diner uniform to her worn-out boots, to the exhaustion etched into her face. He seemed to catalog every detail, as if committing her to memory. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice grave. "You saved my son." Amelia swallowed hard, her instinct bristling as he reached into his coat pocket. She stepped back quickly, chin lifting. "I don't need a reward." His lips curved in something that was not quite a smile. "Not a reward." He held out a heavy business card, embossed in silver with nothing but a phone number. "An opportunity." The SUV doors slammed, the vehicle gliding away into the snowy night, leaving Amelia alone with the card. The small rectangle felt impossibly heavy in her palm. Something told her this chance meeting on the frozen streets of Toronto was no accident, and that calling this number might change her life forever. Sleep never came. The card lay on Amelia's nightstand like a small, glowing secret, the silver-embossed number gleaming each time a streetcar's headlamp slid across her basement window. She made tea. She tried to read. She paced the thin strip of floor between the bed and the radiator until the heat clicked off, and the pipes went cold. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the boy's face paler than the snow, lashes trembling as the injection pulled him back from the edge, and the father's eyes, dark and fathomless, measuring. Deciding at 7:02 a.m., she gave up pretending. She dialed. The call connected on the first ring. "Yes," a woman said, crisp, professional, no nonsense. "My name is Amelia Watson," Amelia replied, surprised at how steady she sounded. "I was told to call this number." "Miss Watson," the woman said, as if she had been expecting the call all night. "Bring a piece of identification. Dress plainly. You will arrive at the Dominion Tower, Front Street West entrance, at 9:45. Tell the concierge you are here for the penthouse. Do not be late." The line clicked dead. Not even a goodbye. Amelia stared at the phone. Dominion Tower? The penthouse? That was the glass and steel spike that cut the Toronto skyline, the one she craned her neck at when night shifts ended, and the city looked like it belonged to other people. She glanced at her one decent blouse, the black one she wore for diner interviews, and ironed it as best she could with a pot of boiling water and steam. She tied her hair back, scrubbed the scent of grease from her fingers, and tucked the silver card into her pocket like an ambulatory warning. Snow flurried again as she stepped onto Front Street. Financial district men moved like schools of fish, coats dark and expensive, shoes clicking on salted granite. The Dominion Tower's lobby swallowed her, all marble calm and discreet lighting. Two security guards in tailored suits watched without staring. The concierge scanned her driver's license, murmured a name she didn't catch into a concealed mic, then offered a smooth, rehearsed smile. "Elevator on your left, Miss Watson. Penthouse, you'll be met upstairs." The elevator had no buttons. A keycard slid. The doors whispered shut. Toronto dropped away in a hush of steel and carpet. 40 floors, 50, 60, until the doors opened into quiet and glass and sky. A woman in a charcoal suit stood waiting, posture arrow straight, hair perfectly contained. The same voice from the phone. "Miss Watson." "I'm Elise," she said. "This way, please." The penthouse was a plain of winter light floor-to-ceiling windows pouring the CN Tower, and a lacework of streets into a room where nothing was accidental. To sofas of ash gray, a long table of dark wood, books, but not many, art, but pieces that made silence heavier. Elise guided Amelia past a cluster of men in earpieces who looked, at a glance, like decorators and, at a second glance, like anything but. They stopped at a door that wasn't a door at all until it opened. Inside, warmth, leather, the faintest scent of cedar. He stood by the window, jacket off, sleeves rolled, tie loosened. In daylight, the man from the alley looked even more carved from decision lines at the mouth. The set of shoulders that said he had carried weight for a long time and learned to make it look easy. "Miss Watson." He didn't offer a hand. He offered a seat. "I'm James Blackwell." The name meant something. Of course it did. If you read Toronto headlines with any consistency, you learn to recognize those rare surnames that floated to the top owners of logistics companies. Donors to hospitals, patrons of galleries, movers of ships, trucks, money, influence. Blackwell Logistics had quietly facilitated supply chains from Halifax to the lower mainland. There were also stories you heard only after midnight in diners and taxicab stories. Of why shipments ran on time when others didn't. Of why some men got second chances and others disappeared. Nothing provable. Everything implied. "Thank you for seeing me," Amelia said, folding her hands to keep from fidgeting. He studied her as if reviewing a contract written in a language only he spoke. "My son's alive because you moved quickly. You recognized the crash. You kept him warm." He was not flattering her. He was itemizing. "You did not call 911. You told me not to," Amelia said, then added before she could stop herself. "And I believed you were 8 minutes away." A pause. Something almost like approval crossed his face. "Good, you can follow instructions under pressure." He crossed to the table and opened a slim black folder. "Nicolas has type 1 diabetes. Unstable presentation, volatile, stress-sensitive. He uses a continuous glucose monitor and insulin pump, with emergency protocols in place." His eyes flicked up. "He is 14. He is gifted. He is stubborn, I noticed," Amelia said. Her mouth surprised her a second time. She braced for the consequence. Instead, one of the lines at his mouth softened either the nearest he came to a smile or a muscle. He hadn't used in a while. "I need someone beside him who recognizes a problem 5 seconds before a machine does," Blackwell said. "Someone clinically competent and morally predictable." "Moral. Predictable," Amelia echoed. "You stopped in a dark alley for a boy who looked like money," he said. "That is not normal. That is character." He slid a sheet toward her. It wasn't a job posting. It was a map. Position, private medical monitor. Primary patient, Nicolas Blackwell. Duties, daily monitoring of CGM and pump data. Emergency protocol administration. Coordination with endocrinology. Discreet presence at school functions. Travel readiness at all times. Cover, personal assistant household support with academic aspiration. Compensation, a number that made her vision swim. Housing, provided. Location, Toronto for the immediate term. Westmount, Montreal, thereafter. Non-disclosure, absolute. Security protocols. Non-negotiable. Elise set a glass of water by Amelia's elbow. "You'll review and sign an NDA before we discuss clinical details," she said, neutral as snowfall. Amelia looked up. "I'm 2 semesters short of finishing nursing. I can't abandon that." "You won't," Blackwell said. "We'll accelerate it. Private tutoring. Rotations arranged. You'll finish faster than you would have on your current trajectory." He said it like someone ordering the weather to change. "Within constraints." "What constraints?" "You will not discuss Nicolas's condition with anyone outside of designated medical staff. You will not ask questions about my business. You will follow the directions of my security team without debate, even if they appear inconvenient at the time." The cadence of a clause that had been tested in the world and found necessary. He watched her absorb it. "If any of that is a problem, say so now." A part of Amelia wanted to ask 100 questions at once. Why had he reached her in exactly 8 minutes? Why had the men in the living room watched her shoes more closely than her face? Why did his shirt cuffs hide the fading bruises you learned to recognize in her triage? But each question felt like a door she shouldn't open yet. She took a breath. I have one condition, she said. Nicolas needs trauma-informed care as much as glucose monitoring. If you want him stable, we address what destabilizes him. Silence unfurled. The corner of Blackwell's jaw tightened. His gaze shifted, not away, but inward for a flicker of time. He was not the man above a city, but a father counting the spaces where laughter used to live. He had a mother, he said, voice low. She is gone. Since then, he stopped, restarted. I will consider your recommendation. You'll draft a plan with the endocrinologist. Elise will arrange a short list of therapists who meet my standards. Your standards? Amelia asked, compassion without curiosity, he said. Discretion that holds under pressure. The door at her back opened a fraction. A boy's voice, wry with practiced defiance. You're really doing interviews in the sky now? Nicolas stood there in a school blazer, hair rumpled, cheeks no longer ghost pale, eyes quick enough to size her up in a second. The resemblance to his father was more than bone structure. It was an energy the world would push, and he would push back. He looked at Amelia, at the folder, at the pen poised beside it. You're the one from the alley, he said. Thanks for not letting me faceplant into the afterlife. You're welcome, Amelia replied, dry. How about we start with you keeping your emergency kit within arm's reach of that afterlife? He smothered a grin. Blackwell didn't. You have class in 20 minutes, he said to his son, purely matter of fact. Right, Nicolas's gaze swung once more to the folder. So babysitter, medical monitor, Blackwell corrected. Cover, assistant. Try to engage the frontal lobe you claim to possess. Whatever you say, Your Majesty. Nicolas backed out, but the last thing he did was flick Amelia a look that wasn't quite appeal, and wasn't quite challenge. It said, if you're real, prove it. The door clicked. Blackwell returned to business. There will be resistance, he said. He despises being managed. You will need to be firm without humiliating him. I can do firm, Amelia said. Humiliation is bad for compliance anyway. Correct, Blackwell said. And in that instant the interview lost its adversarial edge and became collaboration still unequal, still rimmed with rules, but real. Elise slid a new document in front of Amelia. The NDA was dense, surgical, without flourishes. Amelia read it slowly. At the line about irrevocable reputational harm, she heard the alley wind again, felt the weight of the card, saw Mrs. Patel's hand setting a paper cup of chai on a saucer and saying, You are braver than you know. Beta. She signed. Blackwell didn't sigh. He didn't smile. But something eased in the room, as if a taut line had been tied off cleanly. He stood. You'll remain in Toronto this week. We'll test the rhythm school, clinic, home. If it works, you'll relocate to Westmount for the longer term. Westmount, she repeated. Montreal felt far enough to be a border without leaving the country. A new city, a different horizon. What about my apartment? My life. You will keep what you require and store the rest, he said. Elise will arrange movers. Your landlord will be made whole. His eyes narrowed a fraction. You will also provide a list of names, people who matter to you. Amelia went still. Why? Because when you stand close to me, you are no longer anonymous. He said, not a threat, not an apology, and anonymity is a shield you just surrendered. Protection extends outward, or pressure does. Better we choose the first. He held out his hand for the first time. She took it. His palm was warm, the grip controlled, the scars across his knuckles pale and old. When he released her, the city came back into focus beyond the glass, the tower's shadow thrown long across the frozen lake, streetcars threading their way through a web of tracks, a gull sweeping past with its own wordless map. Welcome, Miss Watson, James Blackwell said. The work begins now. The snow had begun to melt when Amelia found herself in front of a house that looked more like a fortress than a home. The Blackwell estate in Westmount, Montreal, loomed above her, a sprawling limestone mansion framed by iron gates and high hedges trimmed into perfect, menacing symmetry. The car that had picked her up at Union Station slipped silently through the gates. After a curt nod from the guard, From the back seat, Amelia pressed her hand against the glass. She had grown up in cramped apartments, in hallways where tenants argued over laundry machines. This was another world. The driveway curved around a fountain frozen mid-splash, and security cameras tracked their every move. By the time the car stopped before the double doors, her throat had gone dry. Elise, always immaculate, was waiting. "Miss Watson, welcome to the Blackwell residence. You'll be shown your quarters. After you've settled in, you'll meet Nicolas." Inside, the air was warmer but no less intimidating. Chandeliers blazed against ceilings so high they seemed designed to remind guests of their smallness. Staff moved quietly, housekeepers with crisp uniforms, men in suits whose eyes missed nothing. Amelia's modest suitcase looked laughably out of place on the polished marble. Her assigned room, however, was breathtaking. A suite larger than her entire apartment, with a view of the St. Lawrence River. Yet the luxury only made her uneasy. She had stepped into a cage, albeit a gilded one. That evening, she finally faced Nicolas in a less staged setting. He lounged on a leather sofa in what passed for a family room, scrolling through his phone with teenage disdain. When he looked up, his sharp dark eyes assessed her like a chess opponent. "So you're the babysitter," he muttered. "Medical monitor," Amelia corrected, keeping her voice level. "And you're the patient," he snorted. "Patient? I've been living with this since I was 8. I don't need some diner waitress playing nurse." The words stung, but she didn't flinch. "Funny, because if I hadn't been there in that alley, you'd be in a hospital or worse." That earned her a flicker of respect. He dropped the sarcasm long enough to meet her gaze. "You really don't know what you've gotten yourself into, do you?" Before she could respond, the door opened. James Blackwell entered, and the room shifted as if gravity itself bowed to him. He carried no weapon that she could see, but power radiated from him like heat. "Nicolas," he said, voice clipped, "you'll treat Miss Watson with respect. She is here because you cannot be trusted with your own care." Nicolas muttered something under his breath and stalked out, his footsteps echoing through the marble halls. The silence left behind was heavier than the chandeliers above. Amelia exhaled slowly. "He hates me. He hates what he needs," James replied, his eyes following his son's retreat. "You'll find that common in this house." That night, Amelia learned the rules of the estate. Some rooms were always locked. Some doors led to offices where business meetings stretched until dawn. The staff addressed James with deference that felt military rather than domestic. And everywhere cameras, sensors, subtle barriers that reminded her of the line between guest and prisoner. One detail haunted her most when she helped Nicolas through another glucose dip later that week. He caught her wrist, his eyes suddenly stripped of sarcasm. "You want advice?" he said quietly, breath shallow. "Don't ask questions about my dad's business. Not if you want to stay safe." Amelia froze, the glucometer still in her hand. Nicolas let go, his expression shuddering back to indifference. But the warning lodged in her chest like a shard of ice. By her second week at the Blackwell estate, Amelia felt like she was living into different realities. In the daylight, she was Miss Watson, the quiet personal assistant with a clipboard, hovering just close enough to track Nicolas's glucose monitor, to remind him to eat at the right time, to keep his pump properly calibrated. Teachers at his private academy assumed she was just another one of Mr. Blackwell's many employees, assigned to keep his household running like clockwork. But at night, she was reminded of the other world, the one pulsing beneath the marble floors. That world had its own language, men in suits murmuring about shipments, the faint metallic click of firearms being checked behind closed doors. The way staff members seemed less like employees and more like soldiers. Amelia learned quickly which hallways went silent after midnight, which rooms were off limits, and which questions were safer left unspoken. It was Nicolas who finally broke the silence one evening. Slouched in the back seat of the SUV as they drove home from school. "You're starting to notice it, aren't you?" he asked suddenly. Amelia glanced at him, caught off guard. "Notice what?" "This isn't just about me having diabetes." His tone was flat, too adult for a 14-year-old. "Dad's world, the rules, the enemies, the way we live like we're in a fortress." She tried to keep her voice neutral. "It's not my business. That's the right answer." Nicolas smirked faintly, then leaned closer. But you should know, enemies are always watching, especially the Donovans. Amelia had heard the name whispered once before, in the kitchen when the security men thought she wasn't listening. But hearing it from Nicolas's own lips chilled her. "Who are they?" she asked cautiously. Nicolas shrugged, though his jaw tightened. "Dad calls them competitors. I call them vultures. They want to find any weakness in us. And me? I'm the weakness." Before Amelia could respond, the SUV turned sharply. Her stomach clenched. A black sedan had followed them for the last 3 blocks, headlights keeping a careful distance. She knew that rhythm, that predatory patience. Growing up in downtown Toronto, she'd learned to spot a tail long before nursing textbooks taught her to look for signs of shock. She leaned toward the driver. "We've got a tail." Black Audi, 3 cars back. Tinted windows, the driver's jaw flexed. He spoke a quick code into his calm, and within minutes, 2 other SUVs appeared, sliding seamlessly into traffic. The black sedan vanished as quickly as it had appeared, but Amelia's heart kept pounding. For the first time since she'd stepped into the Blackwell mansion, she truly understood the danger Nicolas had hinted at. The confrontation came at a glittering gala. Amelia had been given a gown deep emerald silk that felt far too expensive to touch, let alone wear. Nicolas had muttered something about a parade of sharks in tuxedos as he tugged uncomfortably at his bow tie. James Blackwell, as always, wore his power like a second skin. The event was held at the Donovan estate on the outskirts of Vancouver, a mansion every bit as grand as Blackwell's, but with an atmosphere Amelia could only describe as theatrical. Crystal chandeliers threw light across mirrored walls. Waiters glided with trays of champagne. The air reeked of perfume, politics, and hidden blades. Michael Donovan made his entrance midway through dinner, flanked by associates in suits perfectly tailored to be anything but armor. He had the kind of smile that seemed painted on, smooth and polished, hiding teeth underneath. His eyes, sharp and assessing, landed on Amelia almost instantly. "And who is this lovely young woman?" Donovan asked as he approached their table, his gaze lingering too long. "My assistant," James said smoothly, his hand resting lightly on Amelia's back. "She's studying nursing while helping me manage certain affairs." Donovan's smile didn't waver, but his eyes gleamed with calculation. He offered his hand, and Amelia shook it reluctantly. His grip was firm, almost mocking, as if testing how easily she might break. The night passed like a performance, where every word carried a double meaning. Amelia felt the tension in the air like static, each polite exchange laced with veiled threats. Nicolas, usually sarcastic and restless, was quiet to quiet. He checked his glucose monitor more than once, his hand trembling slightly. By the time dessert was served, Amelia knew something was wrong. Nicolas's lips were pale, his forehead damp. She slipped a glance at the monitor. His glucose levels were plummeting. "Mr. Blackwell," she whispered urgently. "He's crashing." James's face didn't move, but his eyes flickered. Amelia rose, sliding a tube of glucose gel into her clutch. She forced a smile. "We'll step outside for some air." On the terrace, the cold night air hit her like a slap. Nicolas's knees buckled, and Amelia caught him, lowering him gently to the stone tiles. She worked quickly, smearing glucose gel inside his cheek, checking his pulse, monitoring his breath. "Stay with me." "Nicolas, breathe. You'll be fine." For a moment, panic cracked James Blackwell's mask as he knelt beside them. "What happened?" "Stress," Amelia said, keeping her hands steady even as her heart raced. The adrenaline's burning through his glucose too fast. "He'll recover." Slowly, color returned to Nicolas's cheeks. His breathing steadied, but Amelia's relief curdled when she looked up at the terrace doors. Michael Donovan stood watching, his smile gone, his eyes glinting with cruel satisfaction. He had seen everything. Back in the car later, the silence was suffocating. Nicolas slept in the back seat, pale but stable. James's hands were clenched white on the steering wheel. "He saw," Amelia whispered. "Yes," James replied, his voice flat, almost dangerous. "And he'll use it." To him, Nicolas's condition is a weakness. In my world, weakness is blood in the water. Amelia stared out at the blur of headlights on the highway, the weight of his words sinking in. For the first time, she realized her role wasn't just about keeping Nicolas alive. It was about holding together the fragile shield that kept a ruthless world from tearing them apart. And in that moment, she understood. The Donovans weren't circling anymore. They had caught the scent. The gala had ended hours ago, but Amelia still felt the weight of Michael Donovan's stare clinging to her skin like smoke. By the time they returned to Montreal, Nicolas was asleep in the back seat, his head tipped against the leather upholstery, his monitor blinking steady again. James Blackwell hadn't spoken a word the entire drive. He sat like a statue carved from steel, his hand flexing against the wheel as though keeping it there was the only thing preventing him from breaking something. When they finally entered the mansion, he carried his son upstairs with surprising gentleness, depositing him in bed as if Nicolas were still the small boy he had once been. Then he returned to his study, and Amelia found herself summoned within minutes. The room was dim, lit only by the glow of a bank of security monitors. James stood in front of them, his shoulders squared, his jaw tight. "You noticed the crash before anyone else," he said without preamble. "You acted fast." Amelia crossed her arms, still shaken. "That's my job." His eyes flicked to hers. "No, most would have frozen. You didn't, which means Donovan now knows two things. Nicolas has a condition, and you are essential to keeping him alive." A shiver ran down her spine. "So now I'm a target too." James didn't deny it. He turned back to the monitors, rewinding a feed that showed the gala's terrace. The exact moment Nicolas collapsed, Donovan's shadow lingered at the doorway, his smirk like a knife. "He'll spread this," James said grimly. "He'll whisper it to the right ears. He'll try to turn my son's condition into leverage. Weakness is a currency in my world, Miss Watson, and Donovan is rich in cruelty." The first sign that James was right came 3 nights later. Amelia woke to a vibration on her phone, an unfamiliar number. A single message, "Do you know who you're working for?" A photo followed seconds later. Her old apartment building in Toronto. She bolted upright in bed, pulse racing. That was her old life, her tiny basement suite. The crooked steps leading up to Mrs. Patel's window box of geraniums. By morning, the confirmation came. James's head of security, Ramirez, laid out surveillance photos on the desk. Donovan's men had been spotted at her old neighborhood, knocking on doors, asking questions. "They questioned your landlord," Ramirez said flatly. "Your study partners at the community college. Even Mrs. Patel." Amelia's throat tightened. Mrs. Patel, her neighbor, her surrogate grandmother, the woman who had kept her fed with chai and samosas when money ran dry. The idea of strangers with cold eyes and colder intentions speaking her name at that doorstep made Amelia's hands shake. "Why?" she demanded. "Why target me? I have nothing to do with this war of yours." James's gaze was unflinching. "Because you matter now. To Nicolas. And to me." He leaned forward, his voice lowering. "Donovan doesn't care who you are. He only cares who you protect and who protects you." Amelia's chest constricted. "So everyone I've ever cared about is in danger now?" "Yes," James admitted. "Which is why you will make a choice. Leave and I'll ensure you vanish far enough that Donovan can't touch you. Or stay and I extend my protection to everyone connected to you. But once you accept, there's no undoing it." Amelia stared at him. She thought of Mrs. Patel's smile, of her study group huddled over anatomy flashcards, of the diner owner who had quietly kept her job open. Innocent people, people with no stake in this blood feud. Her voice came out low but steady. "You know I can't walk away from Nicolas now, so don't pretend I have a real choice." James studied her for a long moment. Then, with the faintest flicker of something like respect, he nodded. The escalation came fast. 2 weeks later, Amelia's phone buzzed during Nicolas's biology homework. Ramirez answered before she could even glance at the screen. His expression hardened. "Sir, we have a problem. Mrs. Patel, she's gone." Amelia's heart plummeted. Within minutes, the household moved like a machine. Security sealed the gates. Nicolas was whisked upstairs under guard, and James strode into the garage where the cars idled. Amelia followed, trembling, refusing to be left behind. "They took her," she gasped. "We can't just—" James's hand came down on her shoulder, firm as iron. "That's why we're going personally." Ramirez frowned. "Sir, protocol dictates. They expect me to send security while I stay here." James cut him off, eyes burning. which means they expect wrong. He turned to Amelia, pressing a small black device into her hand. A beacon. If something happens, press it. My men will come. But your priority is Mrs. Patel. Get her out. The drive to the warehouse was silent, the city's neon bleeding into the windshield. Amelia's palms were slick against the beacon. Her heart thudded so loudly she was sure James could hear it. The warehouse loomed at the edge of the port, a carcass of steel and broken glass. The air inside reeked of rust and dust. They moved through the shadows with slow, deliberate steps, James leading like a predator on the hunt. A muffled sob broke the silence. Amelia's chest squeezed. In a dingy office lit by a single hanging bulb, Mrs. Patel sat tied to a chair. Fear etched across her wrinkled face. Relief crashed through Amelia so hard she almost stumbled. Double quotes Mrs. Patel, she whispered. Rushing forward. James positioned himself at the door, gun raised, movement smooth, efficient. Deadly. Footsteps echoed closer. Get her out, James ordered, his voice cold as steel. Now, Amelia fumbled with the ropes, her fingers clumsy with adrenaline. The cords finally gave way, and she pulled Mrs. Patel to her feet, half carrying her toward the exit. That was when a shadow peeled itself from the corner. Michael Donovan. He stepped into the light, his pistol gleaming, his smile cruel. Well, Blackwell's new nurse. Or should I say, his new weakness. Amelia's breath caught. The barrel of the gun pointed straight at her chest. Her mind raced. Medical training colliding with raw survival instinct. Angles, distances. What wounds killed instantly, and what wounds bought time. But instead of pleading, she raised her chin, voice steady. You won't shoot me. I'm leverage. And you won't shoot an old woman. Even in your world, there are lines you don't cross. For the first time, Donovan's eyes flickered with hesitation. It was all James needed. A shadow moved behind Donovan. Swift and silent. Cold steel pressed against the back of his skull. You threatened my son, James said, his voice eerily calm. You abducted an innocent woman, and you touched someone under my protection. Any one of those earns my retribution. All three. That's a death sentence. The room froze, tension wound tighter than a tripwire. Amelia's pulse hammered in her ears, and she realized for the first time that she was no longer just a nurse caught in the wrong alley. She was part of a war. The warehouse was a tomb of steel and shadows. Rusted beams groaned in the wind. Old shipping containers loomed like silent giants, and every corner seemed to breathe menace. Amelia kept one arm around Mrs. Patel's trembling shoulders, half dragging, half guiding her through the maze. Behind them, the echo of James's voice still rang in her ears. Get her out first, no matter what happens. But the world refused to let them go easily. They had almost reached the exit when a single figure stepped out from the gloom, blocking their path. Michael Donovan. The dim light caught the cruel curve of his smile, the pistol gleaming in his hand. Well, he drawled, his tone dripping with mockery. The famous nurse. Blackwell's new weak spot. You made it so easy for me walking right into my den. Amelia froze, her body tensing instinctively between Donovan and Mrs. Patel. She heard her own pulse pounding like a war drum in her ears. Fear clawed at her chest, but she forced her voice steady. You won't shoot me, she said. And you won't shoot her. You need leverage, Donovan. That's all this is. His eyes narrowed, a flicker of irritation breaking his smug calm. He hadn't expected defiance. He had expected tears. And what makes you so sure of that? He asked, raising the pistol a fraction higher. Amelia met his gaze head-on, fighting to keep her knees from buckling. Because if you kill me, you lose your only bargaining chip. And if you kill her, she glanced at Mrs. Patel, trembling but standing, then you prove to everyone you're nothing but a butcher. Even your allies have lines, Donovan. Cross them, and you bleed alone. For a heartbeat, the world hung suspended. Donovan's finger hovered near the trigger. Mrs. Patel whimpered softly. Amelia refused to move. And then, from the darkness behind him, a shadow detached itself. James Blackwell. He moved with the silence of a predator, a gun pressing cold steel against the back of Donovan's skull. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. You threatened my son. You abducted a woman who never touched my world, and you dared point a weapon at her. His words were calm, almost conversational. Each of those sins would have earned retribution. All three together? He leaned closer. That's suicide. Donovan stiffened, his bravado cracking under the certainty in James's tone. You wouldn't. The metallic click of James's gun silenced him. Do you want to test me? James asked. Amelia's breath caught. The scene burned into her mind to titans locked in a standoff, one with desperate cruelty in his eyes, the other with cold, lethal control. She knew James could end it right there, and maybe he should. But she also knew killing Donovan would ignite something bigger. A war not just between two men, but between entire empires. James, she whispered, her voice carrying through the tension. If you kill him, you make him a martyr. He wants that. But if you break him here, humiliate him, he loses everything. James's eyes flicked to her, sharp and calculating. In that instant, Amelia felt the gravity of his world, the balance of power. The way mercy and cruelty were both weapons. Donovan shifted, sweat sliding down his temple. The pistol in his hand trembled slightly, his earlier arrogance replaced by a raw, human fear. James withdrew his gun an inch, but kept his voice low, deadly. You walk out of here alive tonight, because she asked me to let you. Remember that. The next time you touch my family, or anyone under my protection, you won't get mercy. You'll get silence. With a swift motion, he slammed Donovan's hand against the wall, disarming him. The pistol clattered to the concrete, skittering into the shadows. James grabbed Amelia's arm with his free hand. Go, now, together. They half ran, half dragged Mrs. Patel through the corridors until the cold air of dawn hit their faces. A waiting SUV roared to life, Ramirez flinging open the door. Amelia bundled Mrs. Patel inside, her own hands shaking uncontrollably now that the danger was behind them. As the vehicle sped away, the warehouse shrinking in the distance, Amelia pressed her forehead to the window. The city lights of Montreal glimmered faintly on the horizon, but she didn't see beauty in them anymore. She saw warning beacons. She had saved Mrs. Patel. She had stood between Donovan's gun and an innocent life. But in doing so, she had crossed a line she could never uncross. She wasn't just Nicolas's nurse anymore. She was part of the Blackwell War. The ride back to the Blackwell mansion was wrapped in silence. Mrs. Patel leaned against Amelia, exhausted, her frail body trembling from shock. Ramirez drove without speaking, his eyes flicking constantly to the mirrors. James sat across from them, his expression carved from stone, one hand resting loosely on his knee, but radiating a tension that filled the car. Like a storm about to break, when they finally reached the gates, staff rushed to escort Mrs. Patel inside. She was taken to a private guest suite where a doctor was already waiting, summoned hours before they'd even left the warehouse. The Blackwell machine worked with terrifying efficiency. Amelia stayed by her neighbor's side until she fell asleep. Only then did she realize James was waiting for her in the hall, his dark eyes unreadable. Come, he said simply. The study was dim, the city lights of Montreal glittering faintly through the tall windows. James poured two glasses of scotch, pushing one toward her though she barely touched alcohol. He didn't sit behind his desk this time. Instead, he stood near the window, staring out into the winter night. You could have let them take me, Amelia said quietly. That would have been the logical choice. Protect Nicolas. Sacrifice the nurse. That's how men like you calculate risk, isn't it? James turned, his face illuminated by the faint amber glow of the lamp. You think I measure lives by logic alone? You've built your life on control, power, strategy, Amelia replied, her voice trembling but steadying as she went on. People are pieces on a board to you. Don't deny it. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he walked closer, his presence filling the room the way a tide swallows sand. The night you found my son, he began, his voice low, almost rough. You could have walked away. Anyone else would have. But you didn't. You stayed, knowing nothing about who he was or what it might cost you. That isn't logic. That's courage. That kind of courage is worth protecting. Amelia's throat tightened. Even if it risks everything, especially then. He reached out, his hand hesitating just a fraction before cupping her cheek. His thumb brushed lightly along her jaw, callous from years of fights she could only imagine. For the first time since she had met him, His eyes softened. Stripped of the armor he wore like skin. "Stay," he whispered. The word was somewhere between a command and a plea. "Not as Nicolas's nurse. Not as my employee. Stay, because this house hasn't felt like a home until you were in it." The silence between them stretched, thick with everything unspoken. Amelia's mind spun images of her old life flashing in and out. The diner, her study group, Mrs. Patel watering her geraniums. And then, her new life, Nicolas's sarcastic grin when she beat him at chess. The staff who had begun to treat her not as an intruder, but as one of their own. James's steady presence always looming, always protective. She thought of the warehouse, of Donovan's gun aimed at her chest. She thought of James's voice cold, steady, lethal, choosing to keep her alive when it would have been easier to let her die. Her voice came out soft, almost broken. "If I stay, I can never go back. You know that, don't you?" "Yes," James said. No hesitation, no apology. "Then this isn't a choice," Amelia whispered. His gaze held hers, and for the first time, she saw the faintest flicker of regret behind the steel. He lowered his hand but didn't step away. "No," he admitted. "It isn't, but it's the truth." Later, alone in her room, Amelia stared at the heavy curtains swaying in the draft. On her nightstand, the silver business card still lay, where she had placed it the first night. The card that had changed everything. Her old life felt impossibly distant now. The girl who scraped dishes at Benny's diner, who counted coins to afford bus fare, who thought nursing school was the biggest battle she'd face. That girl was gone. In her place stood someone else, a woman who had stared down a Mafia rival, who had rescued her neighbor from kidnappers, who had entered the orbit of one of Canada's most dangerous men and somehow become essential to him. Amelia reached for the card, running her finger over the embossed number. She thought of Nicolas, of his laughter returning slowly day by day. She thought of James, his whisper still echoing in her chest. "Stay." The word haunted her. It terrified her, and yet, for the first time in years, she didn't feel entirely alone. She closed her eyes, knowing the decision was already made. The Blackwell world was no longer just his. It was hers now to. And there was no going back.